a bunch of buses came by. Each driver had a reason for not, I forgot the key, things like that. But I was, okay, I'll wait. Finally, a bus came and he said that we had the key and the lift was working. I said, great, I'll go to the back and I'll meet you there. At which point the driver slammed the door in my face and sped away. And maybe because of all the other ones that had come, I just burst into tears right there on Avenue of the Americas.
Welcome back to another episode of Inspiration for the Nation. I'm Yaakov Linger, and if you think you have obstacles in your life, you probably never heard of Chava Willig Levy. Well, this week I got to sit down with her and talk to her about how she contracted polio when she was a little girl, how in her entire life people told her, you can't do this, you can't do that, and she proved them wrong. This episode is powered by JOWMA, and they're amazing, amazing resources. You will hear more about them, and you'll hear about their project with Chava Willig Levy. Now, here is this week's episode. Wait, but first, this episode is in memory of Shimon David ben Yaakov Shleima, as well as Miriam Sarah Bas Yaakov Moshe. Now, my conversation with the one, the only, Chava Willig Levy. I'm Yaakov Langer, and you're listening to Inspiration for the Nation. I am here with Chava Willig Levy. Thank you so much for letting me come to your beautiful home.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So there's a lot to talk to you about. And I guess take me back to the beginning of your life. Well, maybe it's a weird question, but do you remember your first memory or the beginning of your life?
That's a very good question. I don't. That is to say, when people ask me how come I'm in a wheelchair, I'm a polio survivor, and people ask me all the time, do I remember contracting polio? And the answer is, I don't. I was 3 years old, but the stories that were told over and over again as I was growing up, they became so, embedded in my consciousness that I actually feel as if I was fully aware of everything that happened.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of people have heard the terminology and just heard what polio is, but they don't exactly know what it is. So could you help us, I guess, learn a little more? What exactly is polio?
Good question. It's a virus. Most people, if they contract polio, what they feel is like a bad virus, fever, chills, probably sore throat. But in the majority of cases, people end up afterwards pretty much the same way they were before. But in a small percentage of people, there is paralysis. In some cases, minor. In other cases, pretty severe. Maybe you've heard of Yitzhak Perlman, the famous violinist. Mm-hmm. So he contracted polio when he was 4, and he has been a world-famous violinist performing sitting down. Thank God his arms and hands are perfectly fine. In my case, a lot of things got paralyzed. I mean, my arms are weaker than my legs. My legs are very weak anyway. But there's a second kind of polio that's called bulbar polio. And that's even more rare. And what it does is it paralyzes the diaphragm, the breathing muscle. And so when I first contracted polio, I couldn't breathe. And so I was put in something called an iron lung, which is a real low-tech machine that it looks like a big cylinder, horizontal, and the person is inside. And there are like bellows inside that are manually creating pressure that enable the person to breathe. Before the days of ventilators, I now use a ventilator for about, I would say, 14 out of 24 hours.
Oh, wow.
Because my breathing muscles are weak. And this helps my breathing muscles to rest because there's air that's pushing in through my what I call nasal pillows. Anyway, so
I feel very fortunate that you're I guess I don't say wasting your breath on this, but there's,
I'm the biggest blabbermouth you ever saw. But yeah, I hope I answered the question. Polio.
Yeah. Do you remember? Like, do you remember being in this? What's it called again?
Iron lung.
Do you remember being in the iron lung?
So again, the stories are so real that I feel as if I remember. A wonderful thing happened when we moved here, and we live in Woodmere. We had just moved, and Rabbi Weinberger, Shlita, and the Rebbitzin were giving a kind of a coffee clutch for the women, and I was there. And a woman was sitting next to me, older than myself. And, I said hello. I introduced myself. I said I had just moved here. And, she said hello. And the next meeting, a month later, she was right there next to me again. I said, oh, hey, good to see you. And at the end of the coffee clutch, she said, there's something, I kind of know you from a long time ago, but I'm afraid that if I tell you why, you're going to be upset. So I said, was I arrested once? And I don't remember it. And, but I'm willing to hear, I can take it. What is it? And she said, well, when you contracted polio, I was the student nurse assigned to you. It was the greatest gift in the world. She told me things that mattered so much to me. She said most of all, she remembered my father, Zichrono Livracha, and she said he would be, saying Tehillim right by the iron lung, and he would bring chocolate milkshakes because it was very important that I get back the ability to swallow. And so he would hold the straw to my mouth and very patiently and try to convince me to try to take a few sips. I mean, just little things that brought all of it back to life. So, but do I really remember? Oh, okay, I do have one.
Okay.
I guess my earliest polio memory, there was this horrible nurse. I remember she was blonde and she had this really sullen expression. Anyway, she was feeding me, and what was on the plate was fish sticks, mashed potatoes, and canned beets, the color of dried blood. Mm-hmm. So I said, fish sticks are okay, and the potatoes, but no beets, please. And she's all right. And this spoon of mashed potatoes is coming toward me. I open my mouth, and I'm chewing, and I'm like, whoa, something's weird here. And I spit it out. She had put the beets under the mashed potatoes. What? And, that's like the kind of thing that's incredibly disrespectful of children. I guess another memory, and then I guess I could stop, is how horribly different it was back then. I'm sure hopefully not directly. I hope you've never had to experience this as a parent. But if heaven forbid a child is in the hospital now, it's given. It's just an understood axiom that a parent will spend the night with the child. But back then, when I was a kid, was no such thing. Parents stayed for visiting hours, and then they left. An operation. I remember my friend several years back. Her child had his tonsils were taken out, and I called her. How did it go? She goes, oh, thank goodness. And there we were there in the OR. I said, what? OR? What do you mean? Well, of course. Me and my husband, we were there in the OR wearing scrubs. And then, of course, the moment that our son went under the anesthesia, we left the room. And then when he woke up in the recovery room, of course, we were right there. And I was stunned because nothing like that happened when I was a kid. And I've had quite a few surgeries. Never saw my parents before the surgery, after the surgery. It was a very different time. Thank goodness things have changed. Yeah.
Wow, that's very interesting. So I guess the next step, could you take us through what your childhood was like? Were you told a lot, you can't do this, or you're not able to do this, or you'll never be able to do this?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so the doctors told my parents that I would never walk. And from their point of view, it made sense because there's a muscle called quadriceps that enable people to walk. And on my right side, quadriceps really don't work at all. I was back home finally. I must have been about 4 years old. And I don't know why exactly, but I kind of got this idea to wiggle off the couch and see what I could do. And nobody was in the room. And I started sort of shuffling sideways along the couch. And my mother came into the room and she saw me there and she put me back on the couch and called the doctor. She said, my daughter was taking a few steps and they said, Mrs. Willig, sit down. You must be under a lot of strain. Like they thought she was hallucinating.
Really?
Yeah. But the point, what happened? It's simply that doctors have their theories about what can work, but a kid doesn't know. A kid can figure out things that a doctor doesn't even know. And that's basically what happened. I had decided to substitute certain muscles that are normally not used for walking and use those to sort of throw my right foot forward. So sort of using muscles in my hips or whatever and throwing my... So back then I was able to walk a bit. Now, unfortunately, I'm not able to walk anymore.
But it's great that you got that opportunity. It's such a good lesson in life. Like we're told so many times, you can't do this, and often it's accurate. Someone can't do certain things, but like that's a great example of like just that childhood personality or just the childlike thinking to say, why not?
Right, exactly. So that's kind of that is a very fond memory. Mm-hmm. Growing up, my family is a frum family, and my siblings went to yeshivas, and I did not. Though back then, the schools were completely inaccessible, and to top it off, even regular public schools, most buildings were inaccessible. So I was on a waiting list for years, and finally, when I was 9, I got to go to school. And I was thrilled. I thought, wow, this is going to be great. Finally, I'll be, with kids and everything. Well, it turned out that back then, you basically were in a single room with only disabled kids. And the common denominator that we shared was mobility, some kind of mobility impairment. So all of us were either wheelchair users or maybe walked with crutches. But some of those kids were intellectually disabled, and that, thank God, as I often say, from the chin up, I'm just fine. And so we weren't even allowed to eat lunch in the cafeteria, which is just down the hall from our little room. It's like complete segregation, which made me into a radical.
In what way?
Disability rights, both as just a general citizen of the world, but also in terms of the frum world, and really wanting very much for the frum world to look at people with disabilities as just, their neighbors, their friends, a prospective spouse, things like that.
On our pre-call, you're mentioning this idea that you're not so into the like phrases like inspirational, which I guess is not the best for this show because it's called Inspiration for the Nation, but or the word special. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. I was afraid you'd never want me after I spilled the beans and told you that.
I wanted you even more after that.
Sometimes a compliment can be harmful. So when people say, "Oh, you're so special," "Oh, you're so special," or they'll talk about other people. "Oh, my grandchild has special needs." The word special has become basically a euphemism, and it's as if we have to tip around. We can't say the D word, disabled. Mm-hmm. It implies that there's something so painful about a disability that we just have to try to find a different word instead. I think the word special has been hijacked because it's almost as if you can't use it anymore to mean special.
Right.
So anyway, and inspirational is a little bit the same. You're so inspirational. But you see, that implies that my disability is so front and center that, you just blow me away. You know what? I want people to be blown away by my chalent. That would be really
I should have come here on like a Thursday or like a Friday to have some of that challenge.
Yeah.
Right.
Or any other things, my writing, or of course I'm excited about my podcast. I would love for people to be blown away by that. I'm not trying to say that my disability isn't important. Mm-hmm. It is. It's a very important piece of who I am, but it's a piece and certainly not the most important piece.
Right. Yeah. I think I understand exactly what you're saying, that sometimes when someone has a disability, all of a sudden that a person who's interacting with them and doesn't know them, they just look at it like, okay, this person 100% is the disability, which is going to be further from the truth.
Right. Exactly.
And like you said, it's probably almost always not trying to cause any harm, but it's people just aren't so good at putting themselves in someone else's shoes, really.
Exactly. That's why I would like to think that as we're moving forward, that more and more people are raising their children to look at disability as something interesting, mm-hmm. not something to turn away from, not the kind of thing where if a child points and goes, "Mommy, what's wrong with that lady?" What we don't want is for the parent to grab the child's hand and go, "Shh, don't you know that? That's terrible. You shouldn't have said that." I love it when kids ask questions.
I think that it's like one of the beauty of kids. Like they see it as it is, and as someone gets older, to an advantage, sometimes they learn to, I guess, be a little more mindful. But at the same time, I guess they sometimes be so mindful that they don't really understand how to truly interact with someone.
Right.
It's one of the nice parts of kids. So I want to segue into your bus story.
You and I had been talking about Gamzu Latova.
Sure. And for someone who's not Jewish, who doesn't know what Gamzu Latova, if you could explain that
it's
concept.
A wonderful phrase. It means this too is for the good. It's a really important premise in Jewish living, that even sometimes things that appear to be incredibly unfair or unfortunate, that often we can, if we're lucky, we can see that was actually a blessing in disguise. I'll start with the bus story, but if there's time, I'd love to tell you about the romantic story.
Let's do it.
This is a good long time ago now. I was waiting for the bus to take me home from work. This is right after the city buses became wheelchair accessible. But not all of them were, and there was a lot of resistance on the part of the drivers. They didn't want to deal with the extra having to operate the lift, get out of the driver's seat. Anyway, a bunch of buses came by. Each driver had a reason for not, I forgot the key, things like that. Mm-hmm. But I was, okay, I'll wait. Finally, a bus came, and he said, we had the key, and the lift was working. I said, great, I'll go to the back and I'll meet you there. At which point the driver slammed the door in my face and sped away. Mm. And I, maybe because of all the other ones that had come, I just burst into tears right there on Avenue of the Americas. And I did manage, despite my blurry vision, I saw the 4 numbers on the back of the bus as it was pulling away. And I was going to report this scoundrel. Next bus came, got on it, got to my stop, and unbelievable, there was a dispatcher from the transit authority writing down the arrival time of that bus. So, like bent on justice, I went up to that guy and I said, listen, and I told him what happened and I gave him the bus number, and he looked at his chart and he said, no, there was no bus with that number. And I was like, okay, he's covering for his friend, So we went back and forth like a ping pong match. And then he said, whoa, wait a minute. And he looked back on his chart. He said, oh, yeah, that bus broke down on 57th Street. It's still there. And I realized that if I had gotten on that bus and it had broken down on 57th Street, everybody else on the bus would have gotten off. But if the bus had broken down, that means the lift wasn't going to be working. And I would have been stuck there for who knows how many hours until some repair people came. So I realized 45 minutes after the incident, I realized that incident was in fact a miracle. And I really thanked God for that blessing of being able to see in less than an hour the purpose in something that felt as if God didn't care about me. So can I tell you my romantic story?
Yes. The moment you said romantic story, I'm like, okay, I want to
how could you say no?
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, very soon after that incident with the bus, I was living at the time on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and I lived alone. I was listening to WQXR. It's a classical music station. And it was 5 minutes to 5 p.m. And the host said, oh, we'll be taking a break for the news and we'll be back. And I said, I hate the news. It's always so depressing, I don't want to hear about an earthquake. And back then I was able to walk a little bit. So I got up and I headed over to my stereo to turn off to press the button. And literally just as my finger was about to reach that button, I tripped. And when I trip back in those days, there's nothing I can do to stop. Like, how if you were to lose your balance,
my hands would stop me.
Right, you'd put your arms forward to break your fall or to grab something, but I can't do that. The bottom line is I just crashed to the floor, and to add insult to injury, the radio was still on. I had to listen to the news,
Okay.
But anyway, at the end of the news, this hour began that changed my life. It was an hour of music by Ellie Ameling. She's a Dutch soprano, gorgeous, gorgeous voice. And at the end of that hour...
Hold on. So to clarify, you're laying on the floor.
Right. I'm lying on the floor.
Not able to...
Can't do a thing.
Okay. Just listening
right.
to...
I can't, stand up or crawl or anything. And I did try calling out, but I lived in a pre-war building, very thick walls, and nobody heard me. Anyway, so at the end of the hour, the host said, Miss Ameling will be giving her annual recital 2 weeks from today at Alice Tully Hall, which is part of Lincoln Center. And I just said, I'm going to be there. As long as somebody gets me off the floor.
As long as I get off this floor, I'll go. Yeah.
Anyway, an hour and a half after I fell, I heard the sound of my door being unlocked. And as I often say, I would have welcomed a burglar, but in walked my parents. And frankly, I'm not sure which scenario would have been worse, because they did not feel so good about my living alone.
That conversation that they're like, we don't want you to live alone. You're like, I could handle it.
Right. And here they come in and they find me there lying on the living room floor.
Right.
They got me off the floor, and my father spent 2 weeks installing floor phones in every room of the apartment. And I spent 2 weeks looking for someone to come with me, because I bought 2 tickets to come with me to the concert. And I knew so many musical people, not one person was interested or available to come to this concert. And it was at that point that I remembered this guy that I had literally, we hardly knew each other, but for 10 years we had passed each other like ships in the night. This incident about falling down was 1982. So in 1973, I had been at a concert in Jerusalem. It was something called the Zimriya. It was choirs from all over the world. And I was in the audience, and one of the choirs, it's called the Zamir Chorale, they're based here in New York, they were performing, and I saw this good-looking guy coming on the stage, holding on to the elbow of the person in front of him. And I thought, nice-looking guy. I bet you he's blind. And 6 years later, I was in Central Park, and someone I went to Stern College with was walking, and somebody was holding onto her elbow. And I said hello to her, and she did not introduce me, but I recognized that that was the same person. And then several months before this falling down thing, I was at a horrible singles luncheon. There were, okay, try not to cry here, okay? There were 7 women at each table and 3 men. It was just,
numbers.
Oh my gosh, it was awful. Just awful. I look across the room, and there's that same guy, that good-looking guy. And there he is talking and laughing with the woman sitting on his left. And I thought, why is it so easy for him? We're both disabled, right? I mean, different disabilities, but why is it so easy for him? Well, I found out later that the woman on his left was the only married person in the room, and they had grown up together in New Jersey. But okay, the bottom line is we kept sort of passing each other like this. And finally, at a concert, like a few months before this falling down, somebody introduced me and said, oh, you know, Javi, this is Michael Levy. Anyway, the bottom line is, here I had this ticket, and I knew he was musical. He was in that choir and everything. So I called him. I found his number somehow, and I asked him, I know it's last minute, but would you like to go to a concert on Sunday? And he was actually not available, but he said he would call me back, and it took him a good 5 weeks, which I've forgiven him, but it took him a while. But he did call and invite me to a different concert, and the rest is history. But the point is, if I had not fallen, that's the point, if I had not fallen down, I would have turned off the radio. I would never have heard that Ellie Ameling broadcast and fallen in love with her voice. And I wouldn't have bought the tickets. And this whole series of, the miracle of finally meeting this great guy would never have happened, except that something had to happen, namely falling down, which felt as if God was out to lunch.
That's a remarkable and beautiful story.
We'll be right back to this week's episode, but first I need to tell you about my friends at JOWMA. So JOWMA, I was talking to them, good family friend, works there, runs it, I should say, and we were talking about Chava Willig Levy, and I was saying, hey, I'm going to have her on my show, and she said, that's so funny, you have to see this link that we just worked on it, and she sends me this video. I'm like, holy moly, this is incredible. And they have, I don't want to spoil it, this whole video project with Chava Willig Levy, with her experiences and with how, about her getting polio, and just for those listening, the importance and power of the polio vaccine that you may have questions about. And that's what JOWMA is there for. You could go ahead, go to their website, jowma.org. That's JOWMA.org. Or you could call their free hotline. It's 929, the number 4, Gesund. That's GEZUNT. The links will be in the show notes. And they also have a podcast. I will include it in the links, in the show notes links. Check out their podcast if you want to better your life in terms of health and guidance when it comes to the entire medical world. There's a lot of things that we don't know, and there's a lot of things that we want to know more about. That's what JOWMA is there for. They have an incredible program for women. My good friend, his wife's a doctor, and they're so helpful for people like that. And maybe you're someone who's like, hey, I don't really know much about vaccines. You put all vaccines into one same bucket, and they're very different, all of them, and they each have very different sciences to it. And you may be wondering, hey, I want to know, after watching this episode, I want to know more about the polio vaccine. It's the greatest favor you could do to me to go ahead and educate yourself, become a smarter person, become a more educated person. And you could go to JOWMA to check them out, listen to their podcast, or call their hotline. Now, back to my conversation with Chava Willig Levy. Were you ever told by doctors or maybe just people in your life that like marriage is a nice idea, but it's let's be practical, it's not going to happen for you?
Oh, I was told it all the time. All the time.
So how do you not let it seep in? Like I'm sure there's certain moments in your life you're like, maybe they're right.
No, absolutely. I mean, I guess the most painful memory was a shadchan was in touch with me about my meeting a man who literally was old enough to be my father, a very, very nice person. I'd actually met him, but I told her, thank you so much. I actually did meet him, and
he's not for
me, but right. Very nice person. Thank you. And, I would be happy to hear from you again, and I'd be happy to meet someone perhaps who doesn't have a disability. And I still remember her words. She said, if a man without a disability agreed to go out with you, I would wonder what was the matter with him, psychologically. And I mean, it's still just a source of tremendous pain. But lots of people felt that, just know that who would want to marry somebody like you? You have a lot going for you. Yes, you have a lot of academic achievement, and you very eclectic tastes and talents, but not for my son. And that, it really hurt. It really hurt. I mean, for a long time, I thought I wouldn't want to marry anybody who had a disability because I felt that I would be, in a sense, giving in to a prejudicial idea. But ultimately, what I realized was this wasn't about having to settle, like I'm settling. No, not at all. Michael and I have like so many things in common. We both love music. I mean, with a capital L. We love music. We love children. We care about our spirituality.
You love Scrabble.
We love Scrabble.
For people they can't see what I'm talking about. There's like a Scrabble board over there, and you told me before that you love playing Scrabble.
We are addicted.
Okay.
There's no other word for it. And we have no intention of recovering.
Okay. Guess it's a good addiction to have.
Yeah. But the thing is that our disabilities they're there, but that's not what brought us together at all. As it turns out, our disabilities really are kind of complementary in that, what Michael cannot do, I can do, and what I cannot do, Baruch Hashem, thank God, he can do. So it's kind of a nice,
It's, I think that's the ultimate goal of any relationship, but particularly any marriage, that with everyone and anyone, we all have things in our life that we're good at and things that we're not so good at.
Right.
And like, that's the whole goal of marriage, to meet someone that helps us with the things that we're not so good at. Like that's the best definition of a marriage.
Exactly. So, yeah.
What advice would you give someone listening who's dating now? It's not an easy parsha or a time in someone's life to be in. What advice would you give to them that they feel like they're dating, and it's just not going anywhere?
So I would definitely say that it's really a good idea to throw out your list. I mean, I have stories that I love telling people, but I'm afraid I'm telling too many stories. But
we like stories. Don't worry.
Okay,
do your thing.
I'll tell you two stories. One is someone I went to Stern College with. She spent her sophomore year in Israel, and her Stern College roommate boyfriend was in Israel at the same time. And back then, and this is a long time ago, and in the early 70s, he came by to say hello to her. And with him was a person, a man, and he said, "Oh, Ora, this is Shlomo." And, they talked for a few minutes, and that was that. That night, the friend, her friend's boyfriend, called her and said, "You remember that guy Shlomo? He was with me." "Yeah. Well, he'd like permission to call you." And Ora said, I could be wrong, but it looked to me like maybe he's like 28 or even 29. And he said, yeah. And she said, well, I could be mistaken, but I mean, he looked like he maybe is Yemenite. And he said, yeah. And she said, I could be wrong, but I think he looked like he was maybe 5'4", like very short. Yeah. She said, well, listen, I'm Ashkenazic and I am 19 years old and I'm 5'4". Like, why should I go out with this person? And the friend said, listen, the whole yeshiva loves Shlomo. He's the administrator in the office. He's the kindest person. What would be so terrible just to have a cup of coffee? And she, to her great credit, said, okay. And she met him for coffee, got back to her dorm. All her roommates were waiting. Well, and she said, he grew in my sight. Baruch Hashem, they are married with something kind of like 11 kids.
Oh, wow.
And one of them is actually married to my cousin's son. So that's kind of nice. One more story on this dating thing.
Let's do it.
Okay, this is told from the point of view of a guy.
Okay.
Guy goes to pick up a girl. From the moment he picks her up, he realizes this isn't going to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. He has a great sense of humor. Every time he said something kind of witty, looking back at him was this somewhat confused expression like, huh? So he realized, look, nice person, but not for him. Took her to a restaurant. The waitress, on the other hand, every time he said something witty, if she happened to be there taking their order or whatever, she had some real nice quip, a rejoinder. And it happened at the end of the meal. His date excused herself for a moment, used the best restroom. Mm-hmm. And it just happened. The waitress came by with the check. And he said, look, I know this may seem inappropriate, but I really like your sense of humor. Could I call you? And she said, okay. And she wrote a number on a napkin. And he called her. And thank God they're married. But I like to tell people that, number one, she is 10 years older than he is. And second, she's not a waitress. She has a very high-level position with what then was called the Board of Education. But her friend was a waitress and called her that night and said, I'm down with the flu. Can you cover for me? But again, it's the idea of, you might have had a list. I'll never want to go out with somebody who's X years older or younger than I am, or taller than or shorter than. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, why?
Right.
Why? Is that what really matters? Anyway, I
like that.
That's my take.
I want to segue to hearing a little more about being a parent for you. So my first question is, were you told as well, similar to just how, like, you're going to, no, marriage, I don't know if it's for you. Same thing with children?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there were two issues with children. Before we knew that we were actually going to be facing years of infertility, for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with our disabilities, mm-hmm. but even before that, people just felt like, come on, how are you ever going to manage, to have children? You're just being unrealistic. But people also said that about getting married.
Yeah.
You're being unrealistic.
The same people who said that, right?
Right, exactly. My feeling was, my parents named me Chava. And Chava means mother of all living.
Right.
And, they say when a parent names a child, he or she has a moment of prophecy. There's some reason, there's some meaning as to why your name is Yaakov mm-hmm. and why my name is Chava. So I really believed that surely if I was given that name, Chava, mother of all living, then surely motherhood is in my destiny. I really believe that. Anyway, so yeah, we dealt with years and years and years of infertility. And after so much, we went through many, losses and all kinds of treatments, nothing. And finally, I said to my husband, I don't think I can keep up with this. I think we should just give up on this whole thing and let's just try to adopt. Mm-hmm. And so we stopped all the treatments, all the everything, and we started looking into adoption. And it was at that point that, Baruch Hashem, thank God, I got pregnant.
Really?
And and thank God. Rabbi, I'm sure you know that Rabbi Pesach Krohn, Shlita, wonderful person.
Yeah,
so
I know him.
Right, he's wonderful, a wonderful friend. We were friendly because of Rabbi Grossman, the discotheque rabbi.
Yeah.
So we both were supporters, each in our own way, of his organization. Anyway, so when Tehila, our daughter, was born, Rabbi Krohn was so excited he came to meet this miracle baby. And I walked him downstairs to the lobby, and he turned to me at the last moment. He turned and he said, "Don't worry, Javi. Next time it'll be a boy." And I looked at him. I started laughing. Like, what do you mean next time? I mean,
This is it.
I was not a youngster
Right.
anymore. I was close to 40. I mean, what do you mean next time? But thank God he was right. One time, Tehila was about 3. And Aaron would have been about 1.5 years or so. And we were on Riverside Drive. All of a sudden, we heard like kind of stomping feet. And there was a group of people marching down Riverside. All of a sudden, Tehila said, "Ima, look, a parade. Abba, here, a parade." As in Hear, you know. Mm-hmm. Ima, look, a parade. Abba, here, a parade. And it's one of my most precious memories because this is what I'm after in life. This is true emancipation. Just the ho-hum. Not like, oh, isn't that amazing? It's more like, okay, my mother can see this parade. My father can hear this parade. And it's, to me, that's what I'm after in life. Just the ho-hum.
That's really nice. As your kids got older, was there any challenges by the fact that for them, sometimes children could be unforgiving and cruel sometimes? Was there any challenges with that your children, as they got older, like realizing that each of you did have a disability and then look at it as a negative?
I'm sure that there must have been moments along the way, but I don't like my focus, at least when I'm thinking of them as young children. I'd come to pick them up at school and they would hop on the back of my wheelchair and we'd go riding off. And a lot of their friends would be like, "Hey, can I also get a ride?" Like, so,
right.
You know, I'm sure there's no question, of course. When you think about it, if other parents, they're going to be going on a trip, well, I can't drive. My husband can't drive. There were things we couldn't readily do. But on the other hand, a lot of their friends' parents would say, "Hey, we're going to someplace. Would your kids like to come along?" So
right.
I'd like to think we tried very hard to arrange that they wouldn't miss out because of our disabilities. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it totally does. So I have here, for those listening, I'm holding Chava's book, A Life Notwithstanding. Okay, so let's first talk about the cover, which is beautiful. I want to go to this place. I don't know where it is, but it looks like a sail ship on water. Are you like a secret pirate that we don't know about?
The truth is, I've never been on a boat, I don't think, ever in my life.
Oh, okay.
But
You're not missing much. I don't think it's very nauseating.
But the reason that there's a boat over there, if you look at 2 or 3 pages in there on the bottom, you want to read what it says on the bottom?
Like the helm in the hand of the sailor, so are we in your hand, good and forgiving God.
Right. So that's from Yom Kippur, right? Ki hine kahege b'yad hamalach, like the steering wheel in the hand of the sailor, or the helm in the hand of the sailor. So that's the theme of my book, is that there are so many times where Hashem is steering us and we don't always see it, but he's always there. The word malach, meaning sailor, in Hebrew is spelled mem lamed chet. And when we were creating a wedding invitation, we had a big problem on our hands because my husband's name, Michael, in Hebrew it's Meir, it's with mem. Chava is with a chet. Lamed for Levi right? So we had all these problems. It could have been chalom, could have been mochel, machol, like all these beautiful Hebrew words that mean, different things. Michael wanted it to be lechem, which means bread. He loves bread. But in the end, we decided to do that verse is on our invitation, and with those letters as a monogram, meaning malach, a sailor, as a way of remembering that God was very much the sailor holding on to the steering wheel and guiding our life.
Do you still feel that presence of Hashem in your life?
Absolutely.
Was there ever any challenging moments in your life that like you look up to Hashem and you're like, you've thrown a lot at me. Like what? I need a break here.
I mean, there've been hard times. Right now, my life is definitely harder than it had been. And that's
How so?
I mentioned to you that way back, I was able to walk a little bit.
Right.
So at this point, I can't walk at all. And that's because of something called post-polio syndrome, which actually is a good segue because
Sure.
I think of myself sometimes as a dinosaur. Like people, I'm one of the last of the Mohicans when it comes to polio. I contracted polio in August of 55. Jonas Salk's polio vaccine was announced in April of 55.
Wow.
Everybody was overjoyed, but they didn't get the vaccine out quickly to enough people. So 4 months later, after the vaccine, that's when I contracted polio. Very few people nowadays even know about polio. This is a very big concern because there are parents who perhaps have opinions about other vaccines. They might have some mistrust of, let's say, the medical establishment right now, the COVID situation. Different people have different opinions.
Right.
But I believe that it could be because of that there's been this kind of slippery slope and parents are now not giving their children any vaccines. You may know that there was, unfortunately, a young unvaccinated adult in New York who contracted paralytic polio not long ago. I think it was in June. And it matters to me a great deal that people know what polio is. And I brought it up because of post-polio syndrome, because there are people who contracted polio and maybe even didn't know that they contracted it, or they did know, but they ended up, thank God, very much the same as they were before. But 30 years later, this something called post-polio syndrome, basically even muscles that were not damaged by polio, those muscles begin to falter. And that's pretty much what happened with me, is that like about 30 years after contracting polio, it became harder and harder for me to take any steps, to the point now where I can't walk at all. And the same thing in terms of my breathing. So I was honored. I don't know if you know about this, but I think you do. I was very honored that an organization called JOWMA,
Yeah, sure.
Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association, they reached out to me and asked me if I would do a video about my life as a polio survivor. And I want you to know, I never talk about my disability as the subject. In other words, I have lots of lectures that I give, a lecture on chesed, a lecture on prayer, a lecture on...
I'm sure music,
Well, yes, actually,
Okay.
music too. But those talks will be peppered with autobiographical anecdotes, some of which relate to my disability, some of which don't. But I've never been one to say, I'm here to talk about my disability. This time, I absolutely felt it was critical, and it was hopefully saving lives. So this video is, I can't get over how much time, hours and hours and hours went into it. And it's the video is something like 13 minutes long.
That's when you know it's a good video, because filming a real movie or just even like a good YouTube video, they say like the amount of filming is always 100 times the actual product. It means they cut it down to the best part and most impactful moments.
I hope. I can't wait. I'm really hoping it'll make a difference. The thing is, like, people don't know about polio anymore, and I'm just praying that people will realize, even if they don't see an actual, I pray that we won't see any more paralytic cases, but people who had polio now, heaven forbid, and have no paralysis now, may find in 30 years that there are things they can't do that they did without even thinking prior. So
first of all, I want to say the video, I assume, will be out by the time this airs, so I'll link it in the show notes for anyone who wants to watch that 13-minute video. I didn't watch the full video. I saw like a teaser of it. It looks amazing. It's pretty wild that Hashem created this vaccine, and I think you said it so well, that even if people are skeptical about different things, like this one, it's been proven the polio vaccine is like a clear bracha. It is a nace. Does it get you angry that people, like, if I were you, I'd be so upset that people are like specifically saying, no, I don't want it. I'd imagine it's out of ignorance, but like, I would be so upset if I was you.
Well, I wouldn't say angry.
No?
I do feel sad. I feel sad. I've heard people say things like, well, it's only 1 out of every 200 people that end up with paralysis. Well, it's okay, yeah, but it's like Russian roulette.
Right.
You don't know who's going to be that 200th person.
Right. And also, what's the alternative? That you get a little, prick in your arm and then then everything's fine?
Right. Exactly. It's not in any way dangerous. It's, again, I pray that people will realize that, as I tried to point out in the video, I know that these people love their children, and it's not coming from it's coming perhaps from, some misinformation. And again, they haven't seen polio up close because, thank God, it's now been virtually eradicated.
Right.
Certainly in this country. This case of polio in June was the first case in about a decade.
Did you meet this person?
Oh, no, I don't. It would be an honor to meet someone, but I don't know the person at all.
I want to talk about your podcast.
I'd love to talk about it.
Because, I think when someone listens to a podcast like they're doing now or watching now, they're always on the horizon for another podcast. So first, could you tell us about your podcast?
Of course. It's called Breathtaking.
Okay, great name.
And thank you. And it celebrates all the things that take my breath away, mostly in the area of music and lyrics. I will say that it's very eclectic. It's not particularly intended for a Jewish audience.
Okay.
It's only on Spotify. People who are not paying Spotify users can still access it.
Right.
But it's a lot of fun. I come up with these themes. It's like, in my family, they say about me that I have the melody malady. Everything makes me think of a song. It's terribly embarrassing. I mean, just awful. So for example, oh gosh, let me try to think of a couple of quick examples. Somebody had talked about mishearing a lyric. They thought that a certain word or line in a song was completely, it was like a very funny mishearing of the lyric. And I said, oh. So I created a whole series, like it went on for several weeks, of songs that people have misheard. Now I'm doing one that's called "And Now for Something Politically Incorrect." And it's songs that are, in my opinion, brilliant, fabulous, breathtaking songs, but they are, in our time, perhaps considered politically incorrect. A year ago, I did one called "Falling for Autumn." Obviously, it was done around this time of year, and it was like gorgeous songs that related to autumn. Around Rosh Hashanah time, I guess I did one called "Beyond Belief," and it was songs that related to belief, not necessarily Jewish songs, but just beautiful songs that really captured the idea that there's some being above that watches over us. And anyway, so I enjoy finding some kind of a theme and just kind of going with it.
That's really nice. And I will include the link to your podcast in the show notes for anyone who wants to go and take a listen. I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Get ready for your breath to be taken away. Towards the end of my show, I like to ask people similar, quicker questions. So my first question for you is, if there's one person from history or someone who's no longer with us that you could sit down for an hour with and have a conversation with, who would that be?
Whoa. Oh, my goodness. I think I would love to sit down with Rachel Imenu, just someone who also yearned for children, or actually maybe even more Hannah, who desperately wanted a child. My brother Shlita once said something about her. This is probably too long of an answer. You know how it says that her husband said, "Why are you so sad? Am I not as good as 10 children? I care about you so." And the very next words are, "Vatakam Hannah." Hannah got up and she went to pray. And my brother said, until that moment, she had assumed that her husband was praying with the same intensity as she was. But when he said that, "Oh, come on, isn't it just enough that I love you?" That's when she realized, no, I can't depend on other people. And she got up and she went and she prayed. And that was the beginning of the blessing that led to her having her child. So
That's really beautiful.
too long of an answer.
No, it's a good answer. Out of the 613 mitzvahs, is there one particular mitzvah commandment that you like maybe more than others or appreciate a little more?
Well, this is a little bit of a not exactly, but
Okay.
It's my favorite bracha.
Okay.
My favorite blessing is Shehakol Niyeh Bidvaro. We say it if we're drinking a glass of water, for example. And I really like to translate it a little differently. I think if you look in the prayer book, it'll say, "Blessed are you, Lord our God," that everything is according to his word. But I kind of take a little bit of a liberal translation and I say, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, Shehakol Niyeh Bidvaro," because everything exists because he says so. That helps me a lot. I literally gain strength every time I say that bracha.
He said so. It is that way because that's the way Hashem said it should be.
Right. Everything exists because he says so. And if we believe that God is good and loves us, that means that even if that goes back to all my, stories about buses and radio shows or whatever, that we may not see it. Everything is because he says so, and he cares and he loves us. So take a drink of water. For me, it's a chance to remember that idea.
That's really beautiful. Well, Chava Willig Levy, thank you so much for opening your home and letting me have a conversation with you.
It's been a delight. Wow, time flies when you're having fun.
It's true. My friend Usher Freed told me this, and I think you're going to like it. So when someone compliments something, they say, "Oh, wow, that's extraordinary." And he once was explaining to a comedian, actually, it's not necessarily a compliment, but you might like it as not a compliment, because he was breaking it down. It's like extraordinary, if you just split it up, it's extraordinary. It's like the ultimate of saying, like, this is the most normal, typical, average thing. So, based on what you said in the beginning with special and all that, if I could say that this conversation has been extraordinary and you seem to me as extraordinary, I hope that's appropriate.
Absolutely. I take that as the biggest compliment.
Okay, amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening or watching this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, if it inspired you, if you learned something, go ahead and share this episode with someone that you love or someone that you hate. And please go ahead and check out JOWMA. You could go to jowma.com. That's JOWMA.org. There will be links in the show notes so you can see more of Chava Willig's story, and you could find wonderful, incredible resources in the medical world and just the world of bettering your life from a health perspective. So go ahead and check them out. And if you have any suggestions for us, go to livinglchaim.com. We love all the people that you suggest. Many episodes we are getting from you, from the people that think, hey, that's a great, incredible person you should have on. So go ahead, go to livinglchaim.com, rate us 5 stars on Apple or Spotify, or give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Leave a comment what you think. Maybe there's a part 2 to this episode. You want to hear more about Chava Willig Levy's life. I love saying her full name. Also, go ahead and check out Chava Willig Levy's podcast. She has a podcast, and it's awesome. It's one of my podcasts that I listen to when I go on a drive. So that will be in the show notes. Till next time, stay safe. Lchaim.
Living Lchaim.